Colleagues, welcome. We are very happy to welcome everyone at today's webinar, which is the third webinar in a series of webinars organized jointly by the Ukrainian Bar Association's Human Rights Institute, the International Center for Transitional Justice, Two Towns, and the National University of Kyiv Mohyla Academy. And I'm very grateful for all the co-organizers of this event for supporting this initiative. My name is Ina Lenyova. I'm the director of the UBA's Human Rights Institute, and I will be moderating today's discussion. Today's webinar is particularly dedicated to the experience of Sierra Leone, which championed a transitional justice in so many ways, and Ukraine aspires to follow the example of Sierra Leone, at least in part of accountability and establishment of the special tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine. So it would be very interesting to hear that part of the about that part of the experience as well. We have three distinguished speakers with us who we're very happy to have and to listen to today. We have David Crane, who's a former chief prosecutor for the Special Court for Sierra Leone, and David is also a founder of the Global Accountability Network. We have Binta Mansoureh, Registrar of the Special Residual Court for Sierra Leone, and Volodymyr Grishko, Legal Counsel with Truth Hounds. Before we proceed with substance, I have a few housekeeping issues. We are recording today's event, and we will share the recording, the link with everyone interested. So hopefully more people can join the discussion later on. Please, if you have questions for the speakers, please leave them in the chat below, and we will do our best to answer all the questions we receive. And also, we have interpretation today, so if you would like to use interpretation, please choose one choose one channel for convenience. Without further ado, I would like to pass the virtual mic to Professor Crane. David, please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Ina, and my compliments to my fellow panelists, particularly my wonderful friend Binta Mansoureh, who I've had the pleasure and honor of working with since, dare I say it, 23 years ago in 2002, when we began a very important, and I'll talk a little bit about this as will she, an outreach program, a town hall program where we went out and spoke to, I would say, tens of thousands of Sierra Leoneans, listening to them tell their stories, which is, I think, a theme that we really need to understand, and something that I've learned, and having been in this business now for almost 3 decades, is that victims want to tell their stories in whatever way they have the ability to do that. And that's not just in Sierra Leone, but in Syria, and of course, certainly the wonderful citizens of Ukraine. So as we transition into a time of accountability, we really need to make sure that we are building programs such as an outreach program to make sure that the victims of Russian aggression have a chance to tell their stories to their fellow citizens, but also, as importantly, the region and the world writ large. Victims want to tell their stories. You know, it's really important that we fully understand that Ukraine can do this accountability. We've done this before on a similar tribunal, and we can do it again. So I think that's also another good news story is that we don't have to, quote, as we say in English, reinvent the wheel. We just have to use our incredible experience that we have, particularly in taking down sitting heads of state, as we did in Sierra Leone. We have the capacity to hold Vladimir Putin and his henchmen accountable for what they have done to Ukraine, not just from the International Criminal Court, but as importantly, the new special tribunal on the crime of aggression against Ukraine. I also want to point out that the rule of law is more powerful than the rule of the gun. And Binta has heard me say this many times, but the rule of law is more powerful than the rule of the gun. And you say, well, how can that be? And well, all I would ask and submit to you, ask former President Charles Taylor, who the Special Court for Sierra Leone took down, investigated, indicted, prosecuted, and sentenced him to 50 years in jail. And he is now sitting in a maximum security prison in the United Kingdom pretty much for the rest of his life for what he did to West Africa and particularly the people of Sierra Leone. So I think that we need to fully appreciate the fact that we have taken down a sitting head of state for international crimes, and we can do it again, and we will, and we are. And I think that our listeners, particularly in Ukraine, should take heart in the fact that it will be done. And he knows this. Vladimir Putin hears our footsteps, and he is very well aware of what happened to Charles Taylor. And so again, the rule of law is more powerful than the rule of the gun. Now, before we get into some of the things that were important related to accountability and victim listening to victims in West Africa and particularly Sierra Leone, I kind of want to put all of this in a context. You know, since 1945, there have been various waves of accountability, starting the first wave, as I call it, at Nuremberg, at the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg, where the world came together for the first time to account for horrors beyond imagination and to account for the Holocaust, particularly. And this is the first time where nation states came together, created a tribunal, created rules of procedure and evidence, and did their work in a fair and open trial. And this is what we're doing. We did in Sierra Leone, and this is what we're doing in Ukraine. Nation states came together and created a tribunal. It took a while, it took quite a while, in fact, almost 3 years, but the good news story is we do have a special tribunal. So that first wave of accountability, atrocity accountability, was Nuremberg. The second wave of accountability is what I call the age of accountability itself. In other words, after the wall came down, after the Soviet Union dissolved, there was a period in the 1990s where the world began to realize that the Nuremberg model was the model by which we account for atrocities. And we had terrible atrocities in Yugoslavia, in Rwanda, and of course in Sierra Leone, and other places as well. But again, another thing that we need to fully understand that the bright red thread of creating tribunals and courts is politics. It's a political event that creates tribunals. It's not a legal event. We have the law, we have the experience to actually run the courts, but it's a political decision by a region or the international community to create this. So I think that that's kind of also something that we need to take away. But the world decided politically to create the tribunals, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, the Special Court for Sierra Leone. And then we also, during this age of accountability, we created the world's permanent international court, and that is the International Criminal Court in Rome in 1998. And so for a period of 2 decades, we had the age of accountability, and we were doing a remarkable job. Despite a lot of headwinds, we did account for some horrific tragedies in these particular regions of the world. But then around 2015, we saw a new age develop, a new wave called the age of the strongman, where we saw increasingly a nationalistic approach to international affairs, looking inward to solve problems as opposed to outward. And with the advent and the closures of all of the major tribunals, the temporary ones in Rwanda, Yugoslavia, and Sierra Leone, we saw kind of a gap beginning to develop. And we see strongmen around the world, over a dozen of them, seizing power and using the instability in the world as a political basis by which they could seize power, and many of them are currently still in power, raising havoc. So this was a step backward, actually, from the age of accountability, and we're pretty much in that wave right now, the third wave being the age of accountability. But I'd like to pause and actually offer perhaps a fourth wave of accountability. With the aggression by the Russian Federation in Crimea, but then certainly in 2022 when they invaded Ukraine, the world paused and looked around, even in the middle of this third wave of the age of the strongman, and looked for international criminal law to hold people accountable. It wasn't pretty and it wasn't something that was done quickly, but the world all of a sudden stepped back and they looked to the International Criminal Court and they started having discussions about what do we do about the crime of aggression. So we see now, even in this dark time where it seems the rule of law is retreating all around the world, in reality, we have created the Special Tribunal on the crime of aggression against Ukraine. In the middle of this darkness, there is a candle, light, bright, and ready to do its work. We also see and that's why I still call this perhaps the fourth wave, and that is a return to perhaps using the rule of law. We actually have a former head of state of the Philippines, former President Duterte, sitting in before the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity, dealing with the murdering of the extrajudicial killing of drug cartel members in the Philippines. And so he is now sitting in the ICC being fairly and openly prosecuted for for violations of international law. So that's another bright and shining moment here in this darkness. And then out of nowhere, last December, almost a year ago, the terrible Assad regime, who had been in power for over 50 years, a half a century, fell in 3 days, came out of nowhere. And we have now a moderate, temporary head of state who is looking for many things, one of which is to stabilize Syria and to bring it back on a path of normality. But also, he is also very interested in using the law for accountability. And I think that that is something to take heart of. And they truly are interested in prosecuting those who destroyed their country as well. So these are things that I would say almost we're kind of in a fourth wave of accountability, that the world is returning to the importance of the rule of law in in creating international peace and security. So let's take hope with, we don't get a lot of wins in this business, but we do have some wins, and I think that we need to take heart in that. Well, let's briefly talk about the UN Special Court for Sierra Leone. We had a terrible civil war going on for 10 years, largely ignored and really misunderstood by the international community, that saw the murder, rape, maiming, and mutilation of over 1.2 million human beings. And President Kaba sent a letter to the Kofi Annan, the Secretary General, saying, I need some help. I don't think we can deal with this. We need accountability. And so the Security Council created the Special Court for Sierra Leone in UN Security Council Resolution 1351 in 2001. And in 2002, I was asked by Kofi Annan to be the chief prosecutor, and we went over there and we began our work with Binta and many other wonderful people to seek justice for the people of Sierra Leone. We're proud to say that the Special Court for Sierra Leone was the last of the major tribunals to start and the first to finish. And the reason why that was done, and I'll talk about that a little bit more, is we knew where we're going, why we were doing it, and when we were finished. And over a period of 10 years, we did account for the terrible tragedy that took place in Sierra Leone. And most importantly, and I think this is where the outreach program is so important, is that the people of Sierra Leone felt that justice had been done. Because again, I really want to emphasize this, all of this, creating tribunals and courts, it's for and about the victims. And if you set up a court and you ignore the victims, then you are setting yourself up for potential failure. So what were some of the key initiatives of the Special Court for Sierra Leone? Well, one of the things is when I had the honor and privilege of being designated as the founding chief prosecutor for the Special Court for Sierra Leone, I created a strategic plan, a 10-phase plan by which we had a start, we had a middle, and we had an ending of the court and its work. And so this particular plan allowed us to become very efficient and effective. And during this time frame, and we tend to forget this, and this is not casting dispersions against our wonderful colleagues in Rwanda and Yugoslavia tribunals, but that was a challenge. Rwanda and Yugoslavia were incredibly expensive. At one point, they were 25% of the UN budget, and people were frustrated. Diplomats and politicians were frustrated. Can we deliver international justice more effectively and efficiently? And so I had a reputation in the U.S. federal government of creating new organizations and managing them to success. At the time, Secretary of State Colin Powell reached out to me, nominated me to the UN because I had this reputation. And so what we did is develop a strategic plan so that we could deliver justice efficiently and effectively. And at any one given time, we always kept the UN briefed as to what we were doing. So I think, and this is one of the things that, being a part of creating the Special Tribunal on the crime of aggression against Ukraine, this is one of the themes that we were talking with the core group and the Council of Europe, is that we have to create this new tribunal and much more efficiently and effectively. And the Special Court for Sierra Leone is a good example. So we had a strategic plan. Amazingly, Yugoslavia and Rwanda did not. And so that's why they were having some financial problems and causing a great deal of frustration. So the Special Court for Sierra Leone, the world's first international hybrid court, was created to test to see if, in fact, we can deliver justice more effectively and efficiently. And I would like to submit that we have. I think that now that it is closed over the past 10 years, academics, historians, practitioners have said that, in fact, international hybrid tribunal is a model by which, if we can't use the ICC, is the model by which we will use to account for atrocities. And the Special Tribunal on the crime of aggression against Ukraine is modeled a bit on this concept of an international hybrid. Now, another initiative and key to success is we took on a head of state. First time in the modern era where we had the capacity to investigate, indict, prosecute, and sentence a sitting head of state, and we did. As I said in my opening comments, we did take down President Charles Taylor, and so the case of prosecutor versus Charles Genki Taylor, president of Liberia, is the cornerstone by which now we hold all heads of state accountable for international crimes. And certainly Vladimir Putin, who was a brand new president at the time that we were taking down President Charles Taylor, was very aware of, and in fact, ironically, supported our work in Sierra Leone in taking down President Charles Taylor. And we're going to use that very same case to take down Vladimir Putin as a sitting head of state for the crime of aggression in the future, using the rule of law, the Special Tribunal on the crime of aggression against Ukraine. Now, we also made some new law. Interesting. One of the things that was particularly brutal in the tragedy of Sierra Leone at the time was that women and children were paying a particularly terrible price for this rebellion against President Kaba's government and the people of Sierra Leone. And so I made gender crimes the cornerstone of my indictments. And for that, we actually created some new law. We convicted all those individuals who we investigated and indicted for the unlawful recruitment of children under the age of 15 into an armed force. We also created a new crime against humanity, an other inhumane act called forced marriage, to account for the horror of what we call the bushwife. We can talk more about that in the question and answer period if you'd like to do that. And we also created new law, and we also indicted and prosecuted the various rebel leaders of the Civil Defense Force, the Revolutionary United Front, and the Armed Forces Revolutionary Council on attacks on UN peacekeepers. And there were other things that we had done as well, but these are just highlights that we were also making new law, and which is now being used by other judicial mechanisms around the world. But the key was we went after these guys for what they did to the women and children, a particularly horrific series of acts. And then, of course, we also, for the first time in history, we had a truth commission and a justice mechanism, an international tribunal, working together at the same time. And everybody was very skeptical. In fact, as I was being considered to be the chief prosecutor, I was monitoring all these conferences that were being held, the theme being that there's no way a truth commission and an international tribunal can coexist at the same time. And so I kind of chuckled. And when I was asked by Kofi Annan to be the chief prosecutor, one of the first things I did is that in one of my press releases, I said that the Truth Commission and the Special Court for Sierra Leone will work together, and I will use no information, data, or evidence that is presented to the Truth Commission in any of my criminal cases. I said that we'll work together, and I coined this famous phrase now called, I said that truth, the Truth Commission, plus justice, the Special Court for Sierra Leone, equals sustainable peace. And I think that in transitional justice, you have to consider that you have to have the truth and you have to have justice, and you will have sustainable peace. And my thinking is if one of those are missing, then that peace will not be sustainable. And Sierra Leone stands for really a very, very important aspect that you can have a truth commission, and we could have a truth commission in Ukraine, as well as a justice mechanism accounting for the crimes against the Ukrainian people as well. So Sierra Leone particularly is well known now, and we worked very, very hard, and I became very good friends with Bishop Humfer, who was the president of the Truth Commission in Sierra Leone. And I went out. I made sure that we kept that relationship well. I had lunch with him every month. Once a quarter, I brought the entire commission in for lunch, and we sat around and talked about our challenges. But then in our town hall program, which I'll be talking briefly about, I told the people of Sierra Leone to go to the Truth Commission, tell their stories. Because again, remember, victims need to tell their stories. And I said that, we will not use whatever you say to the Truth Commission against you. We need for you to tell your stories. And we did. We never used one bit of evidence that was brought before the Truth Commission in our criminal cases against those who bore the greatest responsibility. So I think that was really, really important. So the Truth Commission and the Special Court for Sierra Leone worked together. It was a success. And so I am positing that we have an example, again, that as we begin to account for the tragedy in Ukraine and the horror that Russia has perpetrated on Ukraine, that we do have the capacity, again, to have both a Truth Commission as well as an international tribunal. And that's something that we need to talk about. Lastly, I just want to briefly talk about, because again, the person who actually ran it with great success is my dear friend Binta Mansoureh. But part of my strategic plan was to create an outreach program, and it had never been done before by any tribunal, going all the way back to Nuremberg. But again, I had this theme that it's the victims we're doing this for, and so that was one of my first concepts, is that I was going to go out and ask my client, the people of Sierra Leone, what happened. That's just something you learn in law school. Ask your client what happened when you're building your case. And so we started our outreach program very, very early on. It was originally in the office of the prosecutor because at the time, I don't think there were more than 23 people in the entire court working together. But we started it very early on. And within 30 days of my arrival in Sierra Leone in August of 2002, we were up in Kenema holding our first town hall meeting with the people of Sierra Leone. As the registry stood up, we brought in Binta Mansoureh, who was the head of our outreach program and ran it successfully for many, many years. And we worked very closely with her office. And we literally walked the entire country of Sierra Leone for 3 years personally. And then, of course, it continued to success after I left. And again, what the importance of an outreach program is that it involves the people, the victims. They have a sense that their tribunal is listening to them. Their tribunal is working for them. Their tribunal is seeking justice for them. And that's something that we need to be thinking about as we start this new tribunal. Those things will work very well in Ukraine as well. So I'll conclude with, I made kind of like three promises to the people of Sierra Leone during our town hall programs as part of our outreach. And that is that the rule of law is fair, that no one is above the law, and as I've already said, the rule of law is more powerful than the rule of the gun. You know, the strength of Ukraine's fight against Russian aggression is the righteousness of their fight in defending their country by the legal use of force and arms, and also their use of the power of the law. They're on the right side of history, and that will be proven so. Now, Ukraine will prevail against the evil of Putin and his aggression. He will face justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Crane, for such a comprehensive overview of the justice mechanism for Sierra Leone. I have a lot of, and especially thank you for the spirit of optimism, which honestly we lack a little bit these days on the, for 4 years since the commencement of the full-fledged war. I have a lot of follow-up questions right away. However, I suggest that we do all the presentations with the speakers and then delve into them a little bit more. At
Good.
this, I would like to invite Binta to the floor. Binta, thank you so much for being with us. We would love to hear you share your story, especially about the managing the court and residual mechanism of Sierra Leone.
Yes, thank you so much, Ina. I think Professor Crane has made my own job very easy because he's done the background to the establishment of the court. Managing tribunals. First of all, let's just look at the purpose of managing tribunals. It is to facilitate the achievement of the mandate of the court. And what is that mandate? For the special court, it was to bring to justice those who bear the greatest responsibility for crimes committed in Sierra Leone since 13 November 1996. There are two aspects to that is very important. The war started in 1991 and ended in January 2002. But the mandate of the court is limited. The temporal jurisdiction dates only to 1996. And those who bear the greatest responsibility means that a handful of individuals will be indicted, prosecuted. And let us look at the context. We had over 45,000 ex-combatants, those who fought in the war, belonging to three major warring factions: the Revolutionary United Front, Armed Forces Revolutionary Council, and Civil Defense Forces. So that in itself, that context, the limitations of the mandate of the court has to be borne in mind when you're thinking of managing a special tribunal. At least we did at the Special Court for Sierra Leone. Why is that important? It is important because it affects the perception of justice of the people. In the context of Sierra Leone, everybody had an idea about who bore the greatest responsibility. Community members were looking at the rank and file, middle-level commanders, and the court itself, the prosecutor, was rightly, according to the mandate of the court, focusing on the high level, people. So while we are talking about managing the court, we need to put in place mechanisms like we did at the special court to address that aspect of the perception of justice. And that is where the registry complemented and expanded work that had started, that the prosecutor's office, has started, because the prosecutor was the first to go around and talk about his client, and then, bring charges against very small number of people. In our conflict, children were also major players in the conflict, major in the sense that they fought like hell. So if you are managing the court and focusing only on the prosecution and trial of a very small number of people, like in Sierra Leone, there is going to be a large segment of the population that felt that there was so much injustice in this mandate. Because how about their suffering? How about the rank and file in the communities? How about that person? So we had all of these frequently asked questions in outreach events. People were asking the same questions all the time. Why only these limited people? Why not my neighbor? Why not the person who killed me? So the answer, the special court's answer was to create this robust outreach program that would engage the people in a sustainable manner, in a sustained manner, where we would engage with the office of the prosecutor, understand what they are doing, engage with policymakers to try to understand why this mandate was designed the way it was, and also the Defense Office for their perspective on these issues, so that we can communicate that to the people. And the overriding explanation was, of course, there were complex reasons for that, but the overriding is it's just impossible for a special tribunal to indict very many people. Cost is a big factor. And that is why I couldn't agree more with Professor Crane when he said outreach has to start even before the tribunal, because that mandates, if you ignore it, in our context at least, by the time this tribunal is set up, is up and running, the perception of justice would have been, so complicated about this whole mandate of the court. So we took it from that, and that was again the spirit that guided the provision of support to the organs of the court, the chambers, the prosecutor's office, but also the defense office. We had to make sure that everything that they needed, was provided. Courtroom support was provided. Judicial and legal services support was provided to the prosecutor's office, the chamber, but also to the defense office, because for fair trial purposes, defense was also a very important part of the support that we were providing. Fairness starts with that, with the perception again of the public of how the defense is treated. So, but even at that, when legal aid to indigent people, our own accused persons were all, declared indigent, so legal aid was provided. And in that context, on the other hand, we ensured also that we had a very, very good witness protection program. Because if the organs are not supported, they are not provided the required support, then the whole management of the court crashes. Because the registry exists to make sure that that support is provided. Now, another context that matters in terms of the management of of course, in our context, after 10 to 11 years of war, everything, was destroyed. State collapse, no infrastructure, the court, electricity, roads, homes, everything was destroyed. The court had to build its own infrastructure. which raised the cost of the tribunal. We had our total budget was, about 300 million or so over the course of 10 to 11 years, on average, about 27 to 30 million dollars per annum. But that cost would have been much less if we had the infrastructure in place to start with, but we didn't. So the very weak institutions, electricity was created, the whole site, 11.5-acre site that was given by the government of Sierra Leone, with funding from the international community to support proceedings, water supply, we had, our own fuel system, telecommunication, system. So it's all of that in terms of managing the court, because you have to provide these services to the court, the organs of the court, to be able to do their job, but also the staffing, the recruitment. Security is another issue. In our situation, we had the UN peacekeeping force there. We also had, I believe, ECOMOG at the start, that it was providing security to the court, because the security forces, they were fighting factions. At that time, the country was grappling with post-conflict reconstruction, how to rebuild the army, how to rebuild the police. So we depended on external parties for all of those issues. Now, the budget management and fundraising. Yes, relatively speaking, our budget, our court was more, cost effective, but still, it was extremely difficult for us to raise funds to conduct the proceedings. And in the fundraising, the prosecutor's office was very, instrumental. Court officials participated in fundraising. That meant we had to travel. At that time, there was no virtual meeting. You couldn't even meet with people over the phone. So you had to travel from country to country to fundraise. I can tell you that donors support accountability, but the funding, takes time. It's challenging to get the funding that you need. First, the budget has to be really, really realistic. In our case, even less than realistic, just to be able to get the funding required to run the court. And that was then, during the special court days. It's not the current financial environment where it has become increasingly difficult to secure voluntary contributions. Again, the statute didn't do us any favor, because according to the statute, the court was based on voluntary contributions. There was nothing there, no percentage that was guaranteed. So everything had to be sourced. It meant, in addition to focusing on trials, in addition to focusing on running the court, court officials had to also go around cap in hand asking donors for money. And that in itself, the only positive thing in that is that it puts pressure on the court to be more efficient. But it does have its drawback, because it can be perceived, it raises issues of the perception of political interference in the affairs of the court, which some of the defense used at one point, to give the impression that the court was being influenced because it relied on big donors to give money. But we countered that, we countered it by saying to a lead counsel that, well, even the money we pay for your defense, your defense team comes from the very donors you're saying, trying to influence. I think that kind of calmed things down a little bit. But fundraising has been difficult, and it continues to be extremely difficult. It's even worse these days because the residual special court is also based on voluntary contributions. The only thing I can say to that is proactive steps to fundraise. Donors like being, persuaded about the work done, and justification as to why the tribunal should be funded. And why is that important? Again, there is a misconception that the special court was favored over the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Sierra Leone in terms of funding. Well, that's not completely true, because this court, like the TRC was based on donations. This court was based on voluntary contributions, but we made fundraising as part of the core activities of the court. If you sit there, you're not going to get the money, even if donors believe in your cause. They have to knock on doors. And in a way, it served us because it made the international community, donors, know a lot more about our court than if we were not holding bilateral meetings and fundraising with them. From them. So in terms of management of the court, I think that's where I would like to stop, because the other issues are obvious. Ensuring you have a robust record management system, archiving system, which must start right from day one. If you don't start archiving from day one, you struggle with it. And in the end, donors have this belief that you just take the records and put them in boxes and put them away. We're talking from experience, because we keep letting donors understand that, no, we've got to do this right. That's not how these records should be managed and preserved. So on that note, I just want to thank you.
Thank you, Binta. This was a fascinating presentation, and I already can say that probably those are the challenges that Ukraine will face as well when the tribunal is established. So this is a lot of food for thought for Ukrainian decision makers as well. And now, last but not least, I would like to invite Volodymyr to the floor. Truth Talents is an organization that works a lot with collecting evidence of atrocity crimes and transitional justice as well. And we invited Volodymyr to elaborate a little bit on how experience of Sierra Leone can be applicable to Ukraine, and what are some common issues that we're looking at. Volodymyr, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. It was really inspiring to hear the thoughts about from people who worked on the tribunal on Sierra Leone. And I think that indeed there are some topics which run in parallel in Ukraine as well. And I think I will link this discussion to the, let's say, historic discussion of peace versus justice dilemma, but also in terms that now we see a lot of discussion and desire, let's say, to make a peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia. And there was also LOM agreement in Sierra Leone, which provided for amnesties, but further it was overruled, like these amnesties were overruled by Special Court for Sierra Leone, and underlined that for international crimes, amnesties could not be given. So indeed, like, my intervention will focus on this interdependence between sustainable peace and accountability for atrocity crimes, especially in medium to long-term perspective, I would say. So I will start with the question, what does sustainability actually mean? right? Because if we want to speak about sustainable peace, we will need to discover what are those elements. And I'm really thankful also to this idea of truth plus justice, which equals sustainable peace from Professor Crane. And maybe I'll just unpack and develop a bit more on this foundation, right? Because especially from the viewpoint of two theories of international relations, let's say. First of all, sustainability could mean the absence of large portions of the population who are deeply unsatisfied with the resolution of the conflict. It could be more relevant from these and more relevant argument for a liberal international relations theory. And another one, more relevant for international relations realists, would be the absence of legal leeway that allows interested groups to challenge the design of the peace settlement and of the peace agreement. And starting with this liberal component, it could be unpacked with several arguments. First of all, as in case with Sierra Leone, but as in case with Ukraine and Ukrainian society as well, and shown by polls, Ukrainian society still wants to pursue accountability work. And it's generally transitional justice wisdom, let's say, that peace cannot be achieved with total ignorance of justice. So at least part of justice processes should be upheld. And there were multiple reports of the Special Rapporteur on Promotion of Truth, Justice, Reparation, and Guarantees of Non-Recurrence, that reconciliation at the society level can only be reached in a sustainable manner through measures of truth, justice, reparation, and guarantees of non-recurrence. And especially it was underlined and highlighted this grave concern over the amnesties, because they will in fact put some people above the law, right? I think there is also an important consideration, especially in Ukraine with thousands, hundreds of thousands open criminal investigation into war crimes, that it will be impossible to pursue all of them. And here, the criterion of prioritization, or let's say high impact cases, could be helpful. It means that it suggests mainly that prioritizing cases which are likely to influence public opinion will positively contribute to raising awareness about different aspects of past violations. It would also send important signals, and it will also galvanize this international support for these initiatives. And there could also be some symbolic or paradigmatic cases which, let's say, shake the conscience either of humanity at large or a specific societal group. There could be some cases against women or children which would be very sensitive and which should not be ignored when discussing this peace versus justice dilemma, I would say. So that's more on this liberal argument side, but there are still some good arguments to make on realist component, because it could be demonstrated through different international obligations that show that whatever is written actually in peace agreement, there are limits for these peace agreements to penetrate into accountability sphere, right? It's to exemplify it, it could be with genocide convention or torture convention, which underline this aut dedere aut judicare principle, which means that either prosecute or extradite, right? So no allowance for an impunity gap. Then there are some ICTY judgments for former Yugoslavia tribunal, that the fact that torture is prohibited as a peremptory norm has also effects, which means that at the interstate level, for instance, it serves to internationally delegitimize any legislative, administrative, or judicial act authorizing torture. Then we have LOM agreement signed in 1999 in Sierra Leone. And it actually granted this blanket amnesty to all rebels in Sierra Leone, despite the position of special representative. But later, and in the statute of the Special Court for Sierra Leone, it did not provide for amnesties. And in Charles Taylor case, actually, the very famous pronouncement that the court rejected limitations of the LOM agreement and said that Sierra Leone could not legally declare an amnesty for crimes under international law. And I think that would be also very important in the case with Ukraine as well. If looking on other perspectives, we will see that that's not, let's say, a case which declines from established practice. Because in Argentina, for instance, there was this famous Simon case. It paved actually the way for fully fledged prosecution in the country after years of stalemate caused by impunity laws, which were introduced actually after the junta trials in the 80s. So it was a case filed by a human rights organization, and a federal judge held that the amnesties laws, let's say, were unconstitutional as they were incompatible with international human rights obligations of Argentina. Many cases were reopened as a consequence, and in the new legislation also declared these laws null and void. So we see actually that from the perspective of the court's jurisprudence, from the perspective of legislation as well, later legislation, and from the perspective of international obligations, human rights obligations, and positions of special rapporteurs, it is incompatible to provide amnesties for serious crimes under international law. And there were many occasions where UN representatives also highlighted that there should not be encouragement to provide amnesties during peace negotiations, because there is this duty to investigate and punish serious human rights violations. It is also derived from the right to an effective remedy under international Civil and Political Rights Convention. So I would say that there will be some practical risks if accountability is sidelined in Ukraine. It could lead to some political deprioritization of major investigations. May have less political will to address atrocity crimes. There could be some funding shortfalls for evidence preservation, prosecutorial work, or even civil society organizations that help shape and help create also the vision for some major cases, symbolic cases, as I mentioned, right? There could be this loss of international expert support, staff, and archival momentum. And it could all lead to this slipping accountability phase, right? When the promotion of investigations for human rights abuses would be stopped. So I think that the very important takeaway here would be that whatever the arrangement will be and whatever the peace agreement would look like, if we want to achieve sustainable peace, it would be very hard to achieve it without at least some degree of justice, including in the form of investigation and prosecution of atrocity crimes. Because we've also seen many times how this impunity would only galvanize and, let's say, provide more arguments and more freedom of choice and freedom of maneuvers for those who violate international law and those who perpetrate human rights abuses. So that's, I think, a big limit where peace agreements should not cross when discussing the end of the conflict. And even if they are crossed, we see that during in a lot of the instances, the amnesty provisions would not be upheld either by international tribunals or by domestic tribunals, or generally by international players or national players in the sphere. Thank you.
Thank you, Volodymyr. I couldn't agree more. And I'm thinking right now that probably we need to organize a separate webinar on the matter of amnesty, because this is a world of its own with a lot of underwater currents. Binta, do you have a question or comment?
Yes, I wanted to add to what he has said, because it resonates so much. This whole peace versus justice. Just to clarify that for Sierra Leone, this was a last resort, giving blanket amnesty. I was there. The peace movement, the government was not winning the war. The government was negotiating from a very weak, position. And if there was any inclusion of criminal accountability in the Lome Peace Agreement, the rebels would have never signed up to it. So ours was a step-by-step approach. And what happened, because the RUF did not keep their part of the bargain, the people were outraged when this Lome Peace Agreement was signed. Everybody thought the government had sold out, and civil society was really angry. But the government thought that it's better to have to stop the hostilities, stop the killing, than not to have anything. So because the rebels did not keep their own part of the bargain, it was then easy for the government, with the full backing of the international community, to request the creation of a court, for criminal accountability. So I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Binta. This is very good to understand. Please go ahead.
Real quickly, of course, we anticipated a motion by the defense teams related to the Lome Peace Agreement, and also, can amnesties wipe out a international effort to account? And we had already prepared our answer to a motion that hadn't even been filed, and so the appeals chamber in the special court was very clear on you can't negotiate away international crimes. And I think that tends to be, and Vladimir, I appreciate you bringing that up, because this is really critical in just our overall thinking about justice for Ukraine as well, is the challenge of all of that. Diplomats are funny about creating tribunals. They don't like to do it. The UN does not like to create tribunals. And so they always come up with excuses. And one of the excuses is, well, you can't do this because the law says this or that. But the Special Court for Sierra Leone very clearly and definitively, their appellate chamber said that you just can't negotiate away international crimes. It just isn't going to happen. And so as we enter into some kind of, and I don't think it's going to happen personally, some kind of peace arrangement for Ukraine, this is a long-term effort. Putin has no interest in doing this. And if you have one party that's clearly not interested, it's not going to happen. Not even a ceasefire. So we just have to, obviously we need to work and think and talk about it and develop modalities and stuff. But in reality, I think that, this is going to be something that we're just going to have to persevere through, and that and hope that peace will come someday. But again, as we talk about this, and we're already working in the background about all of this, is that there just is no international standard to negotiate away atrocity, and it just isn't going to happen. And certainly won't, because of the Special Court for Sierra Leone's decision related to the Special Tribunal on the crime of aggression against Ukraine. The Special Tribunal can use obviously the jurisprudence of this in arguing that the Special Tribunal can continue, regardless of any kind of peace talk about any of this. The Special Tribunal can continue its work, and regardless of any kind of negotiating away something, because of the cornerstone ruling about you cannot negotiate, or you cannot negotiate away atrocities at the international level. So just a point as an aside.
Thank you, Professor Crane. And I do have a question following what you mentioned in your intervention. When we talk about the establishment of the Special Tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine, there's a lot of, let's be honest, there's a lot of political resistance in prosecuting sitting heads of state and heads of state in general. This is one of the points for discussions within there was one point of the discussion within the core group, and now we have a compromise that basically allows prosecution of heads of state, troikas in general, after they will have ceded their positions and left the office, which might not be the case in case of the Russian Federation. Was it something that you had to face as well in the case of Charles Taylor? Because when he was when the persecution started, he was a sitting head of state, and in general, did you have to deal with the negotiating and fighting political will of the rest of the world with regard to the prosecution?
Well, it's a great question, and as I said in my discussion, tribunals and courts are creatures of political events. Their conflict is a political event, and the creation of a court is a political event. It's a creature of political compromise. There is no template as to, you have an atrocity, you overlay this justice mechanism, and you get a result. The international community approaches it from a political perspective, and that's what it is. It's not a legal perspective. With the caveat is they don't want to do this in the first place, so that none of the tribunals in the modern era were really, we had to fight for these things. And we did so with the Special Tribunal for Ukraine. And so you have to understand that it is a creature of political compromise. And, having been, working in these past 3 years related to the Special Tribunal, you have to understand that a lot of times it's either this or it's nothing. And so do you stand firm on your principles and walk away and nothing happens, or do you work with what you have? And that's what we did with the Special Court for Sierra Leone, with the statute. We work with what we have, not what we would like it to be. All right, that's altruism, and we'd like the world to be a much better place, et cetera, of course. But at the end of the day, you have to deal with the world as it is and what they want that tribunal to be. And so we had some of those challenges in the special court, but in reality, they knew that Charles Taylor and other heads of state, I considered indicting other heads of state as well. And for a political reason, I chose not to, because I didn't think that the international community could take 2 more heads of state plus Charles Taylor being indicted. So I didn't do that. But the special, the head of state issue is a challenge. So when the core group and the Council of Europe were beginning to shape and mold an outline of a statute, that group that I was involved with proffered to them, the compromise is, well, if we're going to have this at all, we're going to have to do something about the head of state issue related to Putin. It's not the way we anticipated it. It's not the way that I would like to have seen it, but it is what it is. And so what you do is you take what has been handed to you by the politicians and you make it happen. And so one of the things that, and Ina is part of this high-level working group that we were involved in this, has to understand that the political victory for the special tribunal is that, yeah, we can't actually take Putin and put him in the dock and prosecute him, but we can investigate him, we can name and shame him, and we actually can indict him. That's critical. The political victory is indicting Vladimir Putin for the aggression against the people of Ukraine. And that sends a signal to all the strongmen around the world that if you do something in your part of the world, you will be indicted for aggression. Now, whether we get whether we get Vladimir Putin or not and his troika, okay, but we can prosecute them. But the key is we can prosecute other people too who to actually sustain the aggression. So we can go after them and prosecute them. Plus, a lot of people don't realize, from my reading of the statute, is that we can go after heads of state that are aiding and abetting the aggression. And so we can both indict, name, and shame the heads of state of North Korea, Iran, Belarus as well. So is it exactly the way we wanted it? No. But like the special court for Sierra Leone, it is what they gave us. Yes, they gave us the authority to prosecute a sitting head of state, and it isn't in the special tribunal statute, but boy, we can do a lot with what we have, and let's do it. Let's not try to wring our hands and go, it's not what we want, it's too bad, and do all the nitpicking about, is this exactly the way we wanted? We have to look at the real world and what the politicians have given us, and let's run with it, and let's seek justice for the people of Ukraine.
Thank you very much. That's we're very hopeful that that's the way it's going to go, and hopefully 2026 is the year. Binta, I have a question for you, if I may. How differently, if at all, did the Sierra Leonean society perceive the impact of the special court and of the Truth Commission?
I think both entities are positively perceived by the population. The TRC existed for a very short period, and that was by design. And they held public and confidential hearings. They did everything they could within the limited time they had. But the TRC, more than any institution in this world that has written about Sierra Leone, the causes of the war, their report stands out. It's a blueprint for non-recurrence, for development, and everything. It's an intergenerational report that would stand the test of time. So, and people know that. Of course, advocacy, about the way forward on the TRC, very few organizations are really paying attention to that. But those who are raising awareness about the good work of the TRC are doing it very well, including the Center for Memory and Reparations. So I have not heard negative comments about the TRC. When some people say the reconciliation part, they did not achieve that. Much work wasn't done. But another perspective is it was unrealistic for them to be given a mandate, of promoting reconciliation. In fact, the word promoting reconciliation doesn't exist anymore. It's like TRC had to do reconciliation. Their report has laid the foundation for healing and reconciliation. And that's why some of us, we still continue to work on TRC issues, preserve their records. The Special Court for Sierra Leone is also positively viewed by the people of Sierra Leone, despite the limited mandates, because again, we worked on that to let people understand, as David Crane said, this is what we had, and we made the best of it, and the people accepted that. So even today, people see the special court as having contributed in a very significant way to the consolidation of peace in that country, and to send a message that no one is above the law, something that we needed. There's a lot of things that the special court did that really changed the rule of law landscape in the country, and the prime example of that was how to do justice, to restore confidence that a judicial entity can be independent, it can be trustworthy. And one of the causes of the war, if you go back to the TRC report, was the corruption in the judiciary. That was part of it, the bad governance. So the special court served as a model in the country that, justice can be different and it can be done in this country. And to date, the national judiciary has inspired reforms in the justice sector. Reform in Sierra Leone is inspired in a major way by the legacy of the Special Court for Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Binta. We have a few questions from the audience. We have questions that I think fall outside of the scope of today's webinar and probably would call for a separate discussion. However, there's one that's very interesting, I think. One of our participants of today's webinar says, in my opinion, in our actions to protect justice, we must take into account that, unlike Sierra Leone, in our case, this is an international conflict recognized at the level of the UN General Assembly, and unprovoked armed aggression against a sovereign country prohibited by the UN Charter. I would like to pose an open question to all of the speakers. In your thoughts, how would that make Sierra Leonean experience relevant or irrelevant to Ukraine? Can we still apply justice mechanisms, and even wider than that, transitional justice mechanisms to the Ukrainian context?
I think that's more for David Crane.
For some reason, I was having some difficulty. Could you repeat the question again? For some reason, I was broken up. That's why I didn't say anything. I wasn't really sure. I apologize.
It was it's a tricky question. In fact, how does unlike in Sierra Leone, we in Ukraine deal with the international armed conflict and provoked armed aggression against a sovereign country prohibited by the UN Charter. Does that change our perception of Sierra Leonean justice mechanisms and transitional justice mechanisms?
We have to come back to a just a common idea, is that the United Nations was set up to resolve our disputes peacefully and only resort to use of force as a last resort, and we have to continue to think about that, to understand that, but that from 1945 now to the present, of which we're celebrating the 80th anniversary of the United Nations. The United Nations at this point in time, because of the problem with Russia in the Security Council, has been weakened and is not a respected player in the overall worldview that it should. And that has strengthened strongmen, but also undermined a lot of the efforts that are implied in the question and the comment as far as stability, developing peaceful arrangements, but also cynical strongmen stepping back and going, I might be able to get away with this. I don't think that the international community has the backbone to sustain to go after somebody for aggression, like Russia. And Russia tested it in Crimea and then jumped in 2022 into Ukraine. And other strongmen are looking and watching in that. And that's why I made the important point is that if we indict Vladimir Putin for the crime of aggression, that's the political victory. And that is exactly what that has to be done and should be done with the special tribunal. With subsequent trial, that's important, but not the victory. The victory is the actual indictment of Vladimir Putin. In the world where the special court was actually operating in, we had the invasion very similar to what took place against Ukraine by the United States into Iraq in 2003. We indicted all of the individuals who had committed such horror against Sierra Leone, and 2 weeks later, there was the invasion. The entire world was looking at West Africa, looking at the special court for Sierra Leone. Then we had the aggression of the United States against Iraq, and the world moved away from Sierra Leone entirely. And we lost all of our political mojo because the world now was looking another way. And so we had to kind of rebuild our stature because everybody was now looking at Iraq versus Sierra Leone. And this is the challenge with Ukraine. It ebbs and flows as well. We saw the tragedy in Gaza, and all of a sudden the world walked away from Ukraine into 2023 for a while because everybody was focused on now the Middle East, and now it's back. And so, courts are creatures of political compromise and politics, but also courts' existence are creatures of circumstances that they are now in and around. And so it was very much like that in Sierra Leone with the special court for Sierra Leone, but it was also very much like that now in Ukraine. Ukraine is now floating in a sea of a rough sea, and yet it has made it's going to be the rule of law, which is going to be the great gyroscope for Ukraine, and it was for Sierra Leone in those tumultuous times as well, is that using the rule of law, using the tribunal as a cornerstone of stability, despite all that's going on around it, is going to be incredibly useful. And so that's why the creation of the special tribunal for Ukraine is so important, is despite all the world around it going and doing different things, once you establish a tribunal, in whatever way it looks, the special court for Sierra Leone, the special tribunal for Ukraine, it can't go away. Once you establish it, you can't make it go away. And it does its work, and that's a measure of stability as political circumstances and reality of life circle all around it. And I think this is going to be a center point for stability for the future of Ukraine, the future of Europe, the region itself, as it begins to try to figure out how best to outlast Vladimir Putin. This is a marathon, not a sprint. We're all running in the same direction, and we have to outrun Vladimir Putin because he's not going to give up anything, and he's not going to sue for peace. He's just playing President Trump. He's regarding this back and forth, but in reality, he has no intent of doing it. So we have to outrun him. And having a special tribunal there doing its work while all of this is happening is really kind of the gyroscope by which eventually stability will be established in the long term for Ukraine and in Europe.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Crane. Volodymyr, would you like to add anything to that?
I think that like the difference between the types of conflict, non-international armed conflict and international armed conflict, would indeed raise this question of dissimilarities and whether we can copy and paste the mechanisms. Actually, I think that copying and pasting would not even work when we talk about the same exact types of armed conflicts, and especially it would be the case when we will talk about different types. But in that regard, I think the most important difference would be indeed within this crime of aggression, right? Because for war crimes or crimes against humanity or allegations of genocide, there could be similar regimes applied, and individual criminal responsibility, especially for war crimes, is now trying to be merged, and the differences are tried to be erased between non-international armed conflict and international armed conflict. Whereas in the case of Russia versus Ukraine, this additional pillar of the crime of aggression arises. And that's why we would not speak about just a special tribunal which will deal with individual criminal responsibility for war crimes and crimes against humanity, but instead we, in the case of Ukraine, we leave these matters to be dealt by national courts or by International Criminal Court, which has jurisdiction over these crimes, but lacks jurisdiction over the crime of aggression. And that's why the different mechanism is now in reality in the case of Ukraine, which is the special tribunal for aggression, right? For specific crime, which is unreachable either by domestic courts because of the immunities, nor by the International Criminal Court because of the jurisdictional limits it has. So I think that's the most important difference between non-international and international armed conflict, and these facet should be addressed via specific mechanisms.
Thank you, Volodymyr. From myself, I would like to add that we had a dedicated webinar on transitional justice in the situations of international armed conflict, and we had an opportunity to talk to a special rapporteur, UN Special Rapporteur on Transitional Justice, Mr. Bernard Duhem, and you can review the recording of that webinar on the resources of the Ukrainian Bar Association. And although, again, for myself, it seems like although some pillars of the transitional justice mechanism, such as truth-telling, guarantees of non-recurrence, memorialization would be different in the context of international armed conflict, but accountability in many respects would be the same or similar, since we talk about international crimes here. So as a Ukrainian, I think there's a lot of experience in Sierra Leone that we could aspire from, or if not replicate, in Ukraine. Colleagues, I don't see any other questions. I would like to offer a last opportunity for our participants to ask a question. Otherwise, I'd like to ask our speakers, do you have any final comments or remarks before we conclude the event? If not, then I would like to sincerely thank Professor Crane. Would you like to? I saw the mic.
No, well, no. I just I want to thank the Ukraine Bar Association and the ICTJ as well. But again, just for the, as long as we keep talking about this and then moving forward and doing something about it, I think that even though it is a dark time, I think that over time we will be able to look back and say these were momentous moments which started something that Ukraine and the region can able to live in peace and stability. And I've been doing this business a long, long time, and despite the darkness, there's always hope, and we continue to move forward. And even though the wind is blowing in our face, we continue to do that. And so let's continue to uphold the rule of law in whatever capacity that we can do that. And eventually it will happen. And we already have a cornerstone in the special tribunal, which will be that gyroscope in this tumultuous sea that we're in. And again, I just want to encourage and Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава. Thank you, Professor Crane. Binta, Volodymyr, Professor Crane, thank you for being with us today and sharing your knowledge and expertise. I would also like to thank our wonderful interpreters for today. Goes without saying, thank you again to all co-organizers of today's event, and more than anything, thank you to our wonderful audience. We appreciate you being with us, following us, and supporting this dialogue and public communication. We will soon publish information about another webinar in the series to come, so please stay tuned, follow our resources, and please come back with more questions. Thank you and have a wonderful evening, wonderful, safe, and quiet evening, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
Thank you.